2 days ago, the strongest earthquake to hit Colombia this century tore through the country's coffee-growing heartland. A magnitude 7.4 quake struck at 7:34 in the morning, and within hours, buildings had collapsed in Cali, Pereira, and Manizales, 5. Capital cities were under red alert, and the confirmed death toll was climbing by the hour. According to Spanish news agency El País, that toll has since risen as high as 224. Here's what makes this earthquake scientifically fascinating as well as tragic. It struck roughly 110 kilometers underground, deep inside the descending Nazca Plate, almost the exact opposite of the shallow earthquake that devastated Venezuela just weeks earlier. Today we're breaking down what actually happened in Colombia, why this earthquake's depth changed everything about how it behaved, and why this specific region has now lived through this exact scenario before. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck western Colombia at 7:34 a.m. local time on Monday, August 10, 2026, with an epicenter roughly 5 kilometers south of the town of San Jose del Palmar, in the department of Choco, one of Colombia's most remote and rain-soaked regions along the Pacific coast. The Colombian Geological Service confirmed it as the strongest earthquake recorded in the country this century, and specifically noted the quake was followed by several aftershocks. Because Colombia's Pacific coast itself is thinly populated, the earthquake's most severe impact fell not on the region closest to the epicenter, but on the country's larger inland cities. Cali, Colombia's third largest city, reported severe damage, with Mayor Alejandro Eder confirming 32 buildings collapsed, including a significant portion of the city's infrastructure. Pereira and the surrounding Risaralda region were hit especially hard, with local authorities reporting at least 40 deaths there alone. 16 people had to be evacuated from an aerial cable car system in Pereira after being trapped for 6 hours. According to the Colombian Association of Capital Cities, as of Monday evening, at least 132 people had died and 570 were injured, with 86 buildings confirmed collapse nationwide and 7 airports forced to suspend operations. By the following days, as rescue teams reached more remote areas and additional casualties were confirmed, Spanish outlet El País reported the death toll had risen to 224, according to Wikipedia's ongoing tracking of the disaster. Colombia's president, Abelardo de la Espriella, formally declared a national emergency following the quake. In Cali alone, the city's mayor reported at least 188 people missing in the immediate aftermath, though officials cautioned that missing persons figures in disaster situations typically decline over subsequent days as communication networks are restored and displaced residents are able to check in. The shaking reached 4 countries. The earthquake's reach extended far beyond Colombia's borders. According to reporting compiled by Mapper, shaking was felt as far as Bogota, hundreds of kilometers from the epicenter, as well as in Ecuador and Panama. No tsunami warning was issued, since the earthquake struck inland rather than offshore, a distinction the U.S. tsunami warning system confirmed directly on the day of the quake. In the remote Choco region closest to the epicenter, communications outages significantly slowed damage assessment for hours afterward, with some areas still lacking mobile phone service well after the earthquake struck. Choco's governor, Nubia Carolina Cordoba, reported 12 deaths and 84 injuries in her department specifically, while community leader Luis Gregorio Moreno, speaking from the regional capital of Quibdó, told AFP that the situation there involved dozens of wounded, but that missing persons remained the largest, most urgent category of concern. Why this earthquake's depth changed everything. This is the detail that makes this earthquake worth examining closely alongside the other major earthquakes we've covered on this channel this year. According to the USGS, Monday's earthquake occurred at a depth of approximately 110 kilometers, with the Colombian Geological Service separately citing a depth of about 103 kilometers, classifying it as what seismologists call an intermediate depth earthquake, occurring within the subducting Nazca Plate as it continues descending beneath South America. This stands in direct contrast to the earthquake sequence that devastated Venezuela back in June, which struck at a shallow depth of roughly 10 kilometers. We explained at the time why that shallow depth made Venezuela's earthquake so catastrophic, with less rock between the rupture and the surface to absorb seismic energy. Nearly all of that energy reached the surface at close to full force. Colombia's earthquake worked according to the opposite principle. Deep earthquakes like this one release their energy across a much wider geographic area, which is exactly why shaking was felt as far as Bogota and into neighboring countries, but that same depth means less of the fault's total energy ever reaches the surface with full intensity in any single location, since a significant amount gets absorbed and dispersed by the 100+ kilometers of rock between the rupture and the ground people are standing on. That doesn't mean this earthquake wasn't genuinely destructive, clearly. With over 100 confirmed deaths and dozens of collapsed buildings, it was. But the specific pattern of damage, severe and concentrated pockets across multiple inland cities, rather than near total devastation blanketing the area directly above the epicenter, reflects exactly the kind of damage distribution seismologists expect from an intermediate depth quake, as opposed to the shallow, concentrated devastation Venezuela experienced in June. Colombia's coffee-growing region carries a specific, painful history with earthquakes that adds real weight to this week's disaster. On January 25, 1999, a magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck this same coffee-growing region, killing 1,185 people and injuring more than 8,500, according to data from Colombia's National Administrative Department of Statistics. Most of that disaster's toll fell on the city of Armenia, with roughly 921 deaths concentrated there alone, and it destroyed nearly 36,000 homes across the region. One Pereira resident, reflecting on this week's earthquake in comments to CNN, connected the two disasters directly, recalling being very young during the 1999 tragedy, but remembering it vividly, and now watching it happen again in the exact same coffee axis. Region in Pereira and Manizales specifically. That kind of generational memory matters in how communities respond to disaster, and it's a pattern we've discussed before on this channel, most directly regarding the Texas Hill Country flooding that struck almost exactly 1 year after that region's previous catastrophic flood. Amid the widespread destruction, rescue efforts have produced genuinely remarkable individual outcomes. According to the BBC, a woman was pulled alive from rubble 36 hours after the earthquake struck, a survival window that search and rescue teams worldwide treat as a critical benchmark, since the odds of finding survivors decline substantially once initial rescue windows extend much beyond that time frame. In Cali, residents described the immediate aftermath in stark terms. One resident, Alvaro, told NPR that his own building had been left in ruins, while the building next to his was completely collapsed, a description that captures how unevenly earthquake damage typically distributes even within the same city block, depending on individual building construction, age, and structural condition. In a detail that adds further complexity to Colombia's emergency response, Wikipedia's ongoing coverage of the disaster notes that the Puracé volcano, located in the country's south, began emitting ash and gas amid the broader earthquake crisis, according to Spanish-language reporting. While officials have not indicated this activity is directly connected to the earthquake's tectonic mechanism, its timing forces Colombia's disaster response agencies to simultaneously monitor two distinct hazard types, precisely the kind of compounding disaster scenario we discussed on this channel when covering the earthquake, wildfire, and heat wave that struck Israel and Egypt on the same day back in August. Governments across Latin America moved quickly to offer assistance following the earthquake, according to Time's coverage of the disaster. Aid organizations, including Direct Relief, began mobilizing medical assistance for immediate health needs in the affected regions. Beyond the immediate, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake striking 110 kilometers beneath Colombia's coffee-growing heartland produced a very different pattern of destruction than the shallow, catastrophic rupture that devastated Venezuela just weeks earlier. And that difference is a direct, real-world demonstration of exactly the science we explained back in June. An earthquake's depth shapes its human cost as much as its raw magnitude does. But for the residents of Pereira, Manizales, and Cali, this week's earthquake also carries a weight that goes beyond seismology alone. This is a region that watched a smaller earthquake devastate this. The exact same corner of the country 27 years ago, and is now, once again, counting its dead and searching through rubble in the same cities. Colombia's earthquake risk didn't appear this week. It's been sitting beneath the country's coffee region for as long as the Nazca Plate has been sliding beneath South America. What changed this week was simply when that risk, once again, came due. We'll keep tracking this recovery and every other major seismic and volcanic event happening around the world right now. Subscribe if you want to see the next update. Drop a comment and tell me, had you heard about Colombia's 1999 coffee region earthquake before today? See you in the next one.